Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I want to talk about a cute little topic. Three of some of my favorite books that I want to talk about. Three books specifically that I want to talk about because feel like I have something to say and contribute to. It's not in any particular order, but I just want to talk about, some of those things. So I hope you enjoy and stick around. Thank you. The first book I'll mention is The Green Mile by Stephen King. Mm. Whenever I think of whenever I ask myself the question of what are my top five favorite books, this one always comes up in my mind because it's so memorable to me. And I remember being in my room reading these books, and I think I read it all as it's like a series of five books, I think, but I read it all as one all together, and it was so interesting. It was like nothing I read before. And also, I think it was like the first Stephen King book I read, which was a really good introduction because it wasn't scary. It was just like supernatural, and it was like really captivating. And I understood, this man, he's really talented. The overall story follows and is narrated by guard Paul Edgecombe, and he oversees several inmates during his time in the jail. And I think he's been there for like 10, 20 years. And so he sees a lot of different characters, but one character who this book sort of like revolves around is John Coffrey. And he's described when he comes in as a very large black man. I think they made Michael Clark Duncan like stand on boxes in order to show him as being a lot larger than everyone else. And I enjoyed it so much because it read like nonfiction. Although the book is a lot about the supernatural powers that John Coffrey has, it's not something that seems like so unbelievable or like wildly, like the things he does aren't like wildly unbelievable. So it reads something like it could be true or like it could happen potentially. The inmate John has supernatural healing powers, and even the way he heals others is presented as something. And the protagonist, the guard who narrates the story, has a good amount of like hesitance in believing these powers. So it's kind of like you're kind of like journeying along with him to like not believe it, and then it's kind of like you're seeing more and more of his powers come out, and it's kind of harder to deny. I also just enjoy the way that Stephen King writes about black characters, and presents them as like not tragic or their lives revolving around racial prejudice or racial discrimination. But I find that most of the Stephen King books that I've read, the black characters are going through just the struggles that the plot or the storyline presents, and not outside things, just directly related to their race. A really great example of this is Stephen King's The Institute, which presents one of the main characters, Kalisha. And Kalisha, who is one of the black main characters, she is kidnapped and used for telekinetic powers, and she struggles with the white children for the same reason. There is no added racial element due to her being the only black kid in the building, and it's really refreshing that she's part of the story, not just a black addition, but her character and personality add to the story. And we don't need a tragic race element. The story is just as good as it is on its own. We don't need another tragic race element. It's just she herself, her personality, and the things she does adds to the story, and that's all you really need. Although a big part of John, who is the inmate, his story being that he was convicted of raping and murdering two white children, it's not the focal point that these charges are mainly racially motivated. Also, because it's set in 1930 something, so it's kind of like it's obvious and it doesn't need to be restated. And John, of course, denies the allegations, but we can see his true character through the interactions and conversations that Paul has with John. He truly is John is truly is a gentle giant, and Paul feels this firsthand when he's dealing with the sickness. It's described that he has like a urinary tract problem. And so he has like discomfort with his groin and pain there. And Paul one day is coming to work and he's walking through the cell, passing by John, and John takes his hand and grabs Paul from his cell and he grabs his groin, and Paul feels no more pain. He feels no more pain in his groin area. Um and these are John's special powers. He grabs people by the groin. Anyway, the book is very entertaining and I feel like it's a good book to reread and I recommend it. Okay, my second book is How We Fight for Our Lives. I have it with me right here because it was one of the first books I actually purchased. The second book has to be a black author, of course, and not just because simply it's a black author, but because this is one of my favorite books. It is one of the most interesting autobiographies I've ever read, and I am so happy that I found this and read this. I was just scrolling through a bookstore one day and it was something that I just picked up, and it's funny cuz then I like later realized how popular it was, and I just want to put that into perspective that I didn't know that this was like award winning or popular at the time. I just read it because I picked it up and I saw it and I found it very interesting. Some people, I always feel like some people were meant to write autobiographies, and Saeed Jones is one of those people, and 100%. Whenever I do read autobiographies, I'm so thankful that the author realized that their life was so interesting and that they had so many like eerie, ridiculous, crazy stories in their lives that they felt like, I need to share this with people because 9 times out of 10, they're very correct in thinking that, and it's like these stories do need to be told. I feel the same way with Rebecca Walker, that her story is also very interesting. I'm glad that she was able to see that and write an autobiography about it. In a very, very general statement, this book is about Saeed growing up as a black gay child and later man, living in the South with his mother, who is a single mom, and his experiences growing up in the church, having relations with white men, and his relationship with his mom, who is a Buddhist, that is a different religion from his Christian grandmother, and kind of like their separation due to their different religions. So Saeed lives between Texas, Tennessee, and later goes to college in Kentucky. God bless his heart. Oh my goodness. Um, he spends his summers with his grandmother in Tennessee going to church. There's a point he mentioned that he went to church more than a lot of his other male cousins because his grandmother felt he needed it more, probably seeing something in him that was different from his other cousins and other boys. There was something more gentle that his grandmother saw that was expressed as weak, such as him carrying his books, quote, like a girl one day when they're in the mall. And I've never read a book in a day. For context, I'm a pretty slow reader, and I want to mention that very avidly because I feel like no one says that or reveals that. It's always like people always say that they're a really fast reader, and that's the only point you hear. I can read 50 pages in 3 minutes, blah blah blah, but no one says openly I'm a slow reader, and I want to express that. So, yeah. Oftentimes, I have to reread several sentences or even a whole passage because I'm like thinking about something else or I didn't take in all of the information. And I mention this because I read this book in the span of 12 hours, which is something I've never done before and I haven't done since. When I picked it up, I read about half of it in the store that I was at, and then when I bought it, I read the entirety of it when I was at home. It was because it was just that interesting. Also, the book is pretty small, but it was just that interesting that I really didn't want to stop reading. Being black myself, it was really interesting hearing the interaction that Saeed had with being a black gay man growing up in the South. It was really interesting and enlightening for me personally to hear another facet of black lives in America and how we navigate through the world, how we learn to keep things sealed and talk to people a certain way, to talk to our family members at times in a certain way in order to protect ourselves, avoid violence, and simply just live in the world. And Saeed knows this and he says this explicitly, quote, being black can get you killed, being gay can get you killed, and being a black gay boy is a death wish. And one day, if you're lucky, your life and death will become some artist's new project. Another part of this book that he mentions is having some of his first sexual encounters with white men and the experiences of that. There's a story of him going into a library bathroom with a white man, and after the deed's done, he runs away and never is seen again. It feels like a dream, which sometimes stories in our own lives kind of feel like that, looking back on a memory with disbelief that it even occurred. Some people were made to write books about themselves, and I'm glad that I got to read the story of Saeed Jones. And the last book I'll mention because I'm very unserious is a series called Painted All Red, the Mind F series. It's ridiculous, but it's so fun. And if you think you don't like reading, I want you to try to read this book and we'll see about that. I like this book because it's like girl boss. I hate that word, I'm sorry, but that's what it is. That's the perfect way to describe it. And also, it's like superficial man hating. Sometimes you just want to see violence on men, and that's okay. That's fine. I don't want to spoil too much of the story, but the main character's name is Lana, and she essentially is a criminal, which is fun. She's a fun criminal. She commits violent acts against typically men, and another one of the main characters, because we flip perspectives, is a man named Logan, and he's an FBI agent. Boo! But twist, he is the FBI agent that is tasked with finding out who Lana is. He is the man behind all of her crimes, and he's kind of like investigating all these crimes. That he's like, who is doing these crimes? It's Lana. She's doing it. And he doesn't know this yet, but somehow they end up going on a date, and I think at a coffee shop, and they end up dating, which is like twist. Also she's like very in charge. She's, girl bossing. I'm sorry about that. But anyway, it's fun. And I didn't want to be so serious. So, yeah. That's it. That's the end. These were three books that I wanted to talk about, and I really hope you enjoyed, and yeah, that's all. Goodbye.